Those who were working in different heavily industrialized parts of the country, they themselves coming from different parts which are not so industrialized, who generically are being called as migrant laborers, went back to their villages. All of us knew about how they went back. Some of them went back with the trains which were provided, others found their own way. But when the pandemic subsided, and when they had all been given also the vaccinations, many of them didn't go back to their old employees. They went looking for better jobs and found them, and therefore there is this good churn that is happening in the Indian economy, and therefore the government's effort for skilling and upskilling is also being ramped up now. And the nature of employment itself is now also getting very speedily ramped up. And that is why I'm not surprised, and I'm glad to quote, Honorable Prime Minister mentioned that India probably can lead the Industrial Revolution 4.0. When he said that, what he indicated is in many industries in a country like India today have already gone into artificial intelligence. They're bringing technology-driven production. Shop floors have more robots than humans in some areas, and therefore there's a churn. So the long and short of employment-related question will have to wait for time to see where who is going back as what, and is he also working together with machine and machine's intelligence rather than just manually.
There are two very important observations that were embedded in what you said. Number one is that India is beginning to reveal some of its dynamism, and I think we've seen that just in the last couple of years when exports from the high-skill, high-technology sector have been doing very well, and the private investment going to that part of the economy has been doing very well as well. And I also endorse your implicit view that we should have better data to measure what is really happening in such a dynamic economy, although that, of course, is particularly complicated. Minister, you talked about various parts of the reform agenda, and certainly over the last few years, especially during your time as finance minister, we've seen a lot of long-standing reform hopes of many people, including myself, beginning to come to fruition. You spoke a little bit about what has been happening with financial sector reforms, and of course, the digitization which is leading to more inclusion. We've seen progress on labor reforms after a long time. On land and agricultural reforms, I know there have been some hiccups, but it seems that there is some progress where there has been some expenditure reforms. What do you see as the real unfinished reform agenda, and what are the key reform priorities of your government in the coming years?
I don't want to sound abstract in my answer that I want to give. Reform has become so much of a fixation of 91, post 1991, when Indian economy got opened up. You had a list of things to do, and they were your first generation reforms. Then after that, there was a second generation of reforms, again, which had a certain set of, listed out items. The first set of reforms themselves, if you go by that kind of a listing, were not completed in 91 to 95, 96, or even another 10 years, for whatever reason. The second set obviously depended on getting the first set completed and then touching the second. So as a result, you reached a stage in India, you had reached a stage in India when it looked as if reforms were matters for discussion, but it will never get executed. But I think from 2000, the virtue of making your economy even more simpler in conduct process, and therefore opening up truly, was made into a rather real-time, robust process. It's not as if I've done A from list 1 and B from list 2, I've done some reforms. They will have to be done, and now they have become old, or generation 1 of the reform, whereas generation 3 is upon us, and are we doing that as well is the question. So when you ask me, what are the reforms you still have to do? It is a process which I have to keep doing and carrying it forward. So it's not just sufficient if I privatize a company here or there, but even looking at some of the core sectors, which we have announced during the 2021 budget, which spoke about public sector enterprises. We opened up all the sectors for private sector to come in. There was no one area totally reserved for public sector to be present. Everything was opened up. That was not even listed reform. We've done it. But then what happens to the public sector units which are already there in those areas? Do you want to keep them? Do you don't want to keep them? We said only in 4 different areas will public sector be present at all. And they will be present minimally. So now we are also trying to remove those excesses, overgrowths, and prime those public sector which per policy will have to be minimally present in some areas only, like telecommunication. There will be at least one public sector held company, which means the others will have to be either amalgamated, sold off, strategically disinvested, or see ways in which they can become far more professionally run. So these are also happening as we are going on. Electricity is going through a major reformatory process, because electricity has a foot with where the states are, the other one is with the center. Generation happens from the center, some generation happens at the state, but the distribution happens at the state level. The payment processes have all been vitiated. So in a way, reform is going through steadily and continuously. It's not as if we've done that and the story ended there. That will have a 3rd generation reform, which I still have to attend. We are committed and we are going through it. And that is why you find even some of those archaic laws had to be removed, because they're becoming very strong instruments of rent seeking. We didn't want that.
If you like the video, do like, comment, share and subscribe.